In this video, you're going to learn how to use touched events and vector forces. By the end of the video, you will have created a combat system with knockback that can be used in any of your projects. So to get started, we're going to go into starter player scripts and create a new local script. We'll call this combat manager because this is where we're going to be detecting user input. And then in this first line, we're going to get access to our context action service. So the context action service is just used for detecting user input. So we're going to bind a new action. So in bind action, we're going to call this punch because that's our action name. The function will be called punch as well. And then this boolean is if we want to create a touch button for mobile, we're going to set that to false. You can do what you want. And then, so this is actually key we want to use. So personally, I'm going to use the E key. So we're going to do that by doing enum.keycode.e. Alright, so now that we have that set up, we can create our punch function. So local function punch. And then in here, we're just, well, first we have to get the parameters. So when you use context action service, it passes 3 parameters. So the action name, which is punch, the input state, and then the input type or the input object, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so if input state is equal to enum.userinputState.begin, then, and here's where we're going to call a remote to our actual punch script. So we're going to make this script in server script service. We're going to call it, we'll just call it punch server, and then we're going to create a remote for that in replicated storage. So we'll go to remote event, and we'll just call this punch RE. Okay. So now we'll go back into our combat manager, get access to all of that. So local replicated storage. And then we're going to get the remote. So the local punch RE is equal to rs colon wait for child punch RE. Alright, and then now we can just fire that off. So punch RE colon fire server. Alright, and then the next thing we want to do, actually, let's go and just put some debugging information in here. So we'll say local replicated storage is equal to game get service replicated storage. And of course, we want the punch remote again, so that way we can actually listen to it in the script. Alright, so punch re dot on server event connect, and then we'll just call this function punch as well. So now we will define it up here. And we'll just say, for now, we'll just say punch, just to make sure that everything is working. So we'll go back into our combat manager. And then let's add a debounce so that way we can't just spam it. So we'll call this local can punch is equal to true. So if the user input state is begin and can punch, then we'll do all of that. And then we're going to set this to false as soon as it gets fired off. And we'll say that the punch can be used every second. So we'll have it wait 1 second and then put define can punch as true. All right. So now that we have all of that, let's just see how this works. Let's check for any errors. So press E, and you can see in our console view, we're getting punched. And I'm spamming it right now, but it's only firing off every second because of our debounce. All right. So now let's actually set up our animation and everything. Alright, so in order to do this, we're going to need our player. So because it's being fired from a client script, our player automatically gets passed. So we'll just get our character, so player.character, and the humanoid, so that way we can load the animation into the humanoid. Alright, so now from here you're going to want your animation. So I'm not going to show how to animate a punch animation. If you don't know how to do that, you can of course look that up, and I might make a video on that later, but for now I already have my animation. So I'm going to copy the asset ID. We're going to put an animation in our punch server script. We'll just call this punch, paste our animation ID. And also one thing to note is that if you want a more realistic punch animation, you're going to want to name the keyframe. So what I'm going to do real quick actually is go into the animation editor and I'm going to load up my punch animation, if it'll let me. Oh, right. So let's make a new rig real quick. Alright, so we're just going to import our punch animation. And I'm going to slide the scrubber until, there it goes, until it gets to the part where I'm actually punching. So this is the part in the animation where the punch is fully extended. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on the keyframe and we're just going to say rename keyframe. I already renamed it, but just rename it to damage. So after you do that, of course, just save it. Then go to your rig and you would just right click on it and save to Roblox. And then go into your toolbox, copy asset ID and paste it into the animation. So now we're just going to go back into our punch server script and we're going to define or get access to our animation. So we're just going to call this punch anim. Let's go to script.punch. Alright, so now we're going to load this into the humanoid. So we're going to call this local punch track is equal to humanoid.animator :load animation and then our punch animation. And now we can play that out. So punch track, play. Alright, so now we should see our punch animation. So I'm going to press E, and as you can see, my character is punching. Alright, so now that we've got that set up, we're going to do a few more things. So right below this, where we're defining our character in humanoid, we're going to say if not character or not humanoid, then return in. That way, if our character is dead or if the character is not loaded, it can't play the animation and give us any errors. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to detect a hit and do damage. So let's say punch track dot keyframe reach. So this is just a signal for when a unique keyframe is reached. So we're going to connect that to a function, and in it is going to be passed the frame. So we're just going to see what this does by printing the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and play, and let's see what gets printed. So we're pressing E, and as you can see, when it gets to our punch frame, it's printing out damage because that's what we named that keyframe. So now we're just going to save server resources by saying if frame is not equal to damage, then return in. That way it's not looking through this function if it's not on the damage keyframe. Okay, so now we're gonna check for a touch on the, we'll say the lower arm of our character since we used an R15 rig. So character dot left, let me make sure I'm naming this right. So we're gonna go up here. So yeah, so on the rig it's called left lower arm because that's what we're punching with in my animation, but of course you can use the right arm. It's all up to you. So left lower arm dot touched and then connect, and we'll call this new function hit. So we'll define that up here. So local function hit, and if you're familiar with touched events, then you know that you're going to need to pass in the other object that is being touched. And now we're going to check for a humanoid. So humanoid is the other object's parent, and we're going to try to find the humanoid in the character. So if the humanoid exists, then we're going to do damage to the humanoid for, let's say, 25 damage. Alright, so let's just see how that works now. Okay, so we've got our dummy over here, so let's see what happens. So yeah, when we punch, it deals damage, but it kills him immediately because we're not disconnecting from our touched event, right? So it's just continuing to inflict damage. So we're going to fix that by defining a connection variable. We'll set that to nil for now. And then where we're doing using the connection, we're going to set the connection variable to that. And then after this function is played out, we're going to disconnect and set the connection back to nil. So now every time we punch, it should just deal 25 damage and stop there. Yep. So we're punching and it's only dealing damage each time we hit it. Alright. So now that we have that worked out, we can add knockback. It's optional, but I'm going to show you how to do it just because. So this is going to require a few more steps. So we're going to need to pass in our player character. Since we're dealing with position, we're going to need our player character to calculate where the knockback's going. And in order to pass that, we're going to have to make this an anonymous function now that passes in the other object. And then it's calling the hit function with the other object. And then since we want our player character, we'll use what we defined up here. So character. And in order to do the knockback, we'll use vector force. So if you don't know what that is, I'll demonstrate that just real quick. So we have our dummy, and so vector force is just an instance. So we'll put that in the humanoid root part, and then in order to use it, you also need an attachment. So alright, so we'll set the attachment 0 to this new attachment we just made, and now you can see which direction the vector force is going in. So it's 1000 on the x-axis. So if we change that to 0, 0, then we'll say 10,000 on the z, and as you can see, it's pointing backwards, right? So it's going to move the dummy consistently backwards at a force of 10,000 on the z. So we'll see what that looks like by going to play, and we'll just run it from here. So now you can see he's slowly moving back. So we can use that to create knockback on our dummy. Alright. So what we're gonna do is, since we need to calculate the direction, we also need the player characters and the enemy characters humanoid root parts. So we'll define that here. So enemy humanoid root part is the other object, the parent, and then we'll find the humanoid root part, and then we'll do the same thing for the player characters. So player humanoid root part is our player character. Then we'll find the first child of humanoid root part. And to calculate the direction, you're going to need the in position minus the starting position. So in this case, it would be the enemy's position minus the player's position. So we'll define that down here. So we'll say the direction is equal to EHRP dot position minus PHRP dot position. So that's just calculating the direction for the knockback. And then we'll create our force. So we'll say local force is equal to a new instance of that vector force that we just saw. We'll parent it under the enemy humanoid root part. And then the attachment for that, we'll just name ATT is equal to instance.new attachment, and we'll parent it under the enemy humanoid root part. Alright, so now we'll say the force dot attachment 0 is this ATT that we made up there, and then the actual force is going to be the direction we defined. And since the direction is a really small number, we're going to multiply that by 10,000. So that way we can actually see the knockback. Alright, so now that we have that worked out, we're going to delete this vector force that we made over here because that was just for testing purposes, and we're going to see what happens now. Alright, go and play the game. And punch the dummy. Let's see what happens. Yep, and he just gets flung back and doesn't stop. And that's because we never deleted the vector force. So we can do that by simply, right here, we can say game.debris, add item, then we'll add the force after 1/10 of a second. So after 1/10 of the second, the force instance is going to be deleted and it won't get knocked back anymore. So now we'll punch the dummy, and it gets knocked back a little bit, but then stops. And we'll just keep doing that and you can see it works pretty well. And another thing I want to do real quick is, depending on your animation, you might be doing damage to yourself. So we're gonna prevent that by saying if humanoid and other object.parent is not equal to the player character. So if the character we're hitting is not the player character, then we can deal damage and all that. Okay, and then we'll also do a test server real quick just to make sure that if we did have multiple players, it's gonna work. So if you go up to test and then this test server thing, you can put 2 players in the game. So let's see what happens. Alright, so I'm gonna punch player 2 with player 1, and yeah, it damages him, he gets knocked back. We'll do the same thing with player 2, and yeah, it works pretty well. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave any questions in the comments below. And because I am trying to grow my channel, any kind of feedback or recommendations would be highly appreciated.